It has been going on for many, many decades. It has been going on for too long.
You know, it was a mess from the start. When I joined the panel, we knew from the get-go that it was messy.
Of these crimes can be attributed to racism in its absolutely worst possible form. And yet this has been met.
The inquiry meant to protect grooming gang survivors? One witness calls it rigged from the start, password-protected profiles, banned from seeking support, gaslit to fit a pre-approved line. That isn't safeguarding, it's control. In this video, we reveal exactly how survivor testimony was boxed in, why the issue of perpetrator ethnicity kept getting dodged, and the mechanism that could flip the power dynamic. A fast, public, parliamentary process with oaths and sanctions. If you want to know what's been hidden and how to drag it into daylight, don't look away now. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. If an inquiry bans survivors from leaning on family or peers, who does that rule protect? Victims or the process? That was the first red flag raised by people inside the room. A survivor like Ellie Reynolds describes a process that was messy from the start, where the rules weren't just housekeeping, they shaped how and what you were allowed to say. You'd be told you could come forward, but not with the person who steadied you through the worst moments. No advocate in the chair next to you, no trusted peer able to catch you when the questions reopened old wounds.
By the collective establishment, and by that I mean social services, police, councillors, members of parliament, governments.
First of all, I think the inquiry that was set up, it was a very controlling atmosphere there. It was very gaslighting.
The effect was simple. Isolated witnesses, filtered testimony, and a panel hearing only what the process was designed to hear. The atmosphere felt controlled. Survivors say they were nudged mid-answer, corrected on framing and warned off territory that complicated the narrative. They describe a tone that made them second-guess their own memories. When staff warn you that discussing the ethnicity of perpetrators could derail the session, you learn quickly which doors are locked. It's a checklist approach to truth. Stay inside the lines and you'll get through. Step outside and the shutters come down. That dynamic skews the record before it's even written, because people adapt to survive the session. Here's how deep the opacity ran. Basic information on the people shaping the process sat behind passwords that even some panel members couldn't access. You have a survivor guided by staff whose bios remain out of reach to the very people responsible for assessing the evidence. If you can't see who's in the engine room, you can't judge the conflicts, the competence, or the agenda. That isn't transparency. It's plausible deniability engineered into the workflow. This is where best practice matters, and where this process veered off the road. Trauma-informed standards aren't a slogan. They call for choice of support person, advanced briefing on procedures, breaks on request, and predictable rules around sensitive topics. Isolation is a known risk factor for re-traumatization, which in turn reduces disclosure quality. Shorter answers, omissions, and a higher chance of withdrawal. If you wanted clean, detailed testimony, you would design conditions that reduced stress, increased trust, and allowed survivors to regulate their exposure. Instead, the rules did the opposite. Contrast that with inquiries that let survivors have an independent advocate in the room and access to peer support before and after sessions. Where that support exists, witnesses stay longer, give more granular detail, and are more willing to return for follow-ups. It also creates a check against leading questions. A trained advocate can flag when a line of inquiry narrows unreasonably, or when a witness needs a break before accuracy slips. This isn't about optics, it's about evidence density and fidelity. Institutional power asymmetries multiplied the damage. Staff knew the scripts and the timings, survivors entered a maze with no map. When staffing structures are opaque and the gatekeepers remain faceless, you erode public confidence by default. Evidence isn't just what gets said on the day, it's the credibility of the process that records it. If the process looks managed, people treat the output as managed, and that reputational stain is hard to wash off. The result was predictable. Multiple survivors withdrew, pointing to manipulation and a process they no longer trusted. Every withdrawal weakened the panel's authority and shrank the pool of first-hand evidence. The public saw headlines about exits and concluded the room wasn't a safe place to speak. That's the immediate answer. Survivors walked because the process restricted support, steered narratives, and hid who held the levers. If that's how testimony was managed, wait until we get to what happened when ethnicity and institutional accountability came up. The next section follows the thread. A question kept getting dodged. Why was ethnicity treated like a tripwire rather than a core line of inquiry? If safeguarding hinges on patterns, why cordon off one of the most obvious variables? People inside the process say the ground rules turned certain words into hazards. You're allowed to talk harm in the abstract, but the moment you connect victims' experiences to who, where, and how, the shutter's lower. That isn't a side issue. It rewrites the scope before any evidence lands. The claims are blunt. Survivors say they were told to keep to a pre-approved narrative that leaned on context and complexity, while sidestepping a demographic strand many considered central to their abuse. They describe briefings that nudged them towards safer lanes, systemic failures, resource gaps, generic lessons learned, while steering clear of questions about perpetrator profiles. When a witness expects a fair hearing and instead finds guardrails around sensitive descriptors, they start editing themselves to get through the session. The result is an account that looks tidy on paper and thin where it matters. Inside the panel, the split widened. Some members argued that the work had to continue, that walking would leave the field to the very people who set the terms. Others concluded the process was past saving and stepped away, saying participation was being used as cover for a predetermined outcome. Meanwhile, politicians fell into the usual trench warfare. One side pointed to culture war agitation. The other cried institutional cowardice. The noise grew. The fixes didn't. Ellie Reynolds called the process rigged and pointed to moments that made the charge feel concrete. Lines of questioning closed the instant they edged toward offender demographics. Follow-ups were deferred, then dropped. Written submissions that pressed the point vanished into procedural long grass. You can tell when a room is allergic to a topic. Witnesses get time-boxed, the chair changes tack, and the transcript reads like a meeting that ran out of patience just when it got uncomfortable. There's a practical cost to that avoidance. Safeguarding frameworks, from multi-agency risk assessments to hotspot mapping, rely on pattern recognition. If you strip demographic variables from the analysis, you blunt the tools designed to prevent repeat harm. Policing models that flag repeat venues, offender typologies, and victim vulnerability depend on seeing clusters as clusters, not as accidents. Pretending a pattern doesn't exist doesn't protect anyone. It just degrades the model and sends officers to the wrong doors. If you want candour on the sensitive lines, Parliament has a faster route than a sprawling inquiry. Select committees have a track record of compelling testimonies at speed. Think of how quickly the banking crisis hearings put chief executives under the lights. Costs stay contained. Timelines are measured in weeks and months, not in years. You get focused sessions, specific document requests, and a public record that builds in real time rather than after endless redactions. A joint Commons Lords Committee could go further. It can issue formal summons, put witnesses under oath, and remind them that misleading Parliament risks perjury or contempt. Non-compliance isn't a scheduling hiccup. It carries consequences. Sessions are televised, transcripts go up the same day, and follow-up demands arrive while memories are still fresh. That mix, oath-sanctioned visibility, changes behaviour. People who dodge under soft rules tend to find their answers under hard ones. Stack that against the classic public inquiry. Years of procedural wrangling, ballooning budgets, and a final report that drifts into the late news cycle. Public trust has learned the pattern. Long process, blurred accountability, selective headlines. Speed and enforcement aren't gimmicks, they're how you restore credibility. When people can see questions asked and answered under oath, their willingness to accept uncomfortable findings goes up, not down. So pay off two lands here. The controlling atmosphere didn't just shape tone, it fixed the boundaries of content. The remedy isn't more choreography, it's a rapid, oath-based parliamentary process that drags the most sensitive lines: ethnicity, institutional shielding, operational failures, into daylight and keeps them there with penalties for evasion. The question now is whether Westminster will actually use the powers it already has, and whether the public will insist on it. A process that muffles survivors will never expose institutions. The only route that flips the power is public, oath-bound, and time-limited. Put testimony under penalty for evasion. Put officials on the record, live, with documents in hand, strip away the choreography, and you start getting straight answers. So press your MP now. Demand a swift joint Commons Lords Committee with subpoena power, televised hearings, rolling disclosures, and tight deadlines. No more years of drift. No more reports that arrive after the moment has passed. Justice needs daylight and deadlines. If Parliament refuses to use its authority, the cover-up doesn't stall by accident. It continues by design.